Kia ora, and welcome to the Nick Nishcast. It's your boy, the Diggity Doo Die Darkness Peptide Panther. Mr. Slippers here for another deep pandemic episode of the Nishcast with the one and only Mr. Wobbly Wildcard. And first of all, sign up to our email thingy, which comes to your inbox twice a week with a couple of goodies, couple of bits and pieces that hopefully make it worth your reading. You can support the Niche Cache on Patreon as well. Otherwise, just read our shit and lap it up. While introducing the wildcard, I'm going to throw it up to the Wobbly Wildcard, and I'm going to do so with this probing question regarding the Wildcard's recent investigation into Blackcaps spin bowlers of the past decade. Spin bowling has taken over the Niche Cache. I wrote the state of spin in Aotearoa, just assessing all the spinners and different teams, the notable spinners and trends and all sorts of stuff. And then the wildcard followed that up with a look at how overseas spinners perform in Aotearoa, which was very interesting. And then he followed that up with a deep dive into Blackcaps test spinners. So kia ora talofa namaste and the big cheers to the Wobbly Wildcard. And what little nugget or what takeaway did you have from your work in researching the piece that you did, surveying a messy decade of Blackcaps test spinnership, that can be added on top to the other stuff we've talked about spin bowling? Like, did you have any other new wrinkles, layers of nuance, or just little tidbits? What do you reckon?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, it's, I don't think anyone's under any illusions of what, spin bowling has looked like in test matches for New Zealand since Daniel Vittori retired. Even a little bit, before Daniel Vittori retired, to be honest. I don't know, there's a whole heap of different, angles that I sort of picked on looking at all this. Like, the overseas stuff, for example, started from the kernel of, something I'd looked at writing about, home and away performances for the Blackcaps, and seeing that, our spinners traditionally have always struggled in New Zealand. Sure, that's no surprise, but guys like Shane Warne and Matua have never had any problems, and plenty of others over the years as well. One of the crazy stats is that of the 38 best innings bowling figures by spinners in test matches in New Zealand, 32 of those 38 are by overseas players, which is rather crazy. Only 2 though in the last 10 years, which is what I started off thinking about why is Shane Warne so much better in New Zealand than every other New Zealand spinner. It can't just be because he's Shane Warne and he's better. Obviously that's true, but at the same time, there must be more to this, that even in our familiar conditions we don't seem to be able to do a whole lot. It's not like these spinners don't play domestic cricket as well. And a lot of spinners take a lot of wickets in domestic cricket too, but it seems like over the last certainly over the last 5 years, potentially as much as up to the last 10 years and a little bit more, just spin bowling in general has gone off a cliff, because none of those, since that era of Warne and Murali, nobody's doing anything interesting over here as spinners. I think the best bowling figures were Keshav Maharaj, maybe, got a was it a 6-fer, I think, when South Africa were here last? It might have even been a 7-fer, but other than that, the last New Zealand spinner to get a 5-wicket bag in a test match innings in New Zealand was Jeetan Patel in 2008. So, rather long time between drinks, and it doesn't exactly look like we're going to get any time soon, which is why probably, the more I wrote about the spinning situation, the more it kind of just led me back to this thing that I obviously already knew, but just, how good that, Trent Boult, Tim Sowley combination is, and then over the last probably 5 years, add in Neil Wagner, where you've got a legitimate, 3-headed dog there, just unstoppable. I think over the last decade, so the exact last decade, going back to May 2010, so not including that 2009-10 summer. I had no idea what that is. I just the reason I picked that is because Cricinfo Stats Guru gives you that option on the drop-down thing of last 10 years. Let's smack that one. Let's go for it. And over those last 10 years, Tim Southee leads the way with 151 wickets in New Zealand. Trent Boult was second with 150. Neil Wagner was third with 137, I think it was. And then in fourth place, the fourth most wickets behind those three was Colin de Gronholm with like 33. So there's more than 100 wickets between fourth place and third place. It's just like, there's a lot of issues with spinners and how well they've performed, and some of the curious, to be generous with it, selection theories behind who's getting picked and whatnot, and how long guys get to prove themselves. And there's a lot of disparity between the home and away performances, which you sort of expect, but don't necessarily expect it to be the wrong way around with Mitchell Santner, who's actually rather decent in New Zealand conditions and terrible overseas, whereas most of them are the other way around. But the thing that kept coming back to me writing that was just like, spinners never even really get a chance because our seam bowling crew is just so damn good.
And that's something we've touched on kind of ad nauseum, so we don't need to jump off that, because we've explored all sorts of ideas, whether the spinners are good enough, what kind of support they have, how they're developed, and all those things. So I think that closes the spin chapter of the pandemic. I'd suggest that spin bowling is the most interesting aspect of the Blackcaps. Like, everything's pretty good with the batting. We know who our best batsmen are. We know who the next tier batsmen are, the job doers, and so on and so forth. We know all about the seam bowling. We've got plenty of good wicket keepers. The funkiest aspect of Blackcaps cricket is the spin bowling, and we have absolutely laid it all out about Blackcaps spin bowling over the past couple of weeks. So if you're ever curious about where the Blackcaps spin bowling ship stands as of early May 2020, go read about it, because we've put in plenty of work with regards to spin bowling. And another little nugget that has dropped over the past few days, wildcard, that I want to get your thoughts on, because you've also done a bit of work around Taikia Waititi's recent productions. You wrote about Jojo Rabbit. You also know far more about Star Wars than I do. So I think it was yesterday it was announced that Taikia Waititi has been, I don't even know what his job is, director, whatever the fuck he is, but he's in charge of the new Star Wars movie. And it's obviously fantastic that Taikia Waititi is now pretty much, he is the Hollywood darling, which is crazy when you think like here is a dude from New Zealand who pretty much clocked New Zealand film and film production with some of his New Zealand based movies, stuff like Boy and that sort of stuff, which just took over New Zealand, was amazing. And then he went to a next level, getting a few Hollywood gigs, and now Taikia Waititi is kind of the dude who saves the franchise movies. And on the one hand, that's a bit of a bummer, because nothing is more icky than the franchise Hollywood movies. Like, they are just the most played out shit. And from my perspective, like, that's a bit dumb. That's a bit dumb to, but if I was in Taikia Waititi's shoes, I wouldn't necessarily reject those opportunities. But it is just weird that the role Taikia Waititi is playing in that aspect of Hollywood with the production line, I guess, is the best way of putting it, or maybe a sweatshop factory of just churning out franchise movies that they know are bankable. People are going to watch them, but there's nothing really overly new or creative. Maybe it's Taikia Waititi who can change that and develop it. But the main point here is that there's a dude from New Zealand who is now in charge of some of the biggest movies of the past decade, if we're living in that time period, and it's just amazing. It's further evidence of Aotearoa's sporting and creative exports. Like, we have this dude from New Zealand who is the hottest movie director, producer, the lead person in the world right now, because some of the biggest franchises in the world are looking at Taika Waititi to save their franchise and reinvigorate their franchise and try and offer something fresh, which is pretty cool and interesting. How do you, having assessed some recent work from Taika Waititi, knowing about Taika Waititi, knowing about the Star Wars franchise and any other movies that he's done, how are you thinking and feeling about some rather nifty news that Taika Waititi will be working with the Star Wars franchise?
It's like, I don't know, it's a bit of a mixed bag for the reasons you pretty much described there, because I don't really care for like the big franchise superhero movie type things, and I don't know, a lot of, obviously they're massive blockbusters, but it just seems like it's such a formulaic thing. But at the same time, it's a massive paycheck for the fella that's hopefully gonna also, when you think about it, fund like future more passion projects. And I know I think he's already it must be in post-production now, I'm not sure, but he was making a film version of that documentary about the American Samoa football team from, I don't know, the documentary was from a few years ago. It was like well received, all that thing. He's turning that into a movie, so that should be typically amazing. He just won an Oscar for Jojo Rabbit, and remember, it wasn't best director, it wasn't like best picture, it was for his writing on the film as well. And with the Star Wars thing, I think he's directing a spin-off movie for the franchise, and he's also co-writing it along with someone else that picked to help him write it. So, no idea like what the scope of that will be. They have been doing some oh man, there's a fair bit of background towards all this, because from his point of view, like the reason they're looking at him, he did that Thor movie. I think he was meant to be doing another Thor movie, but I'm not sure about that. So he's done, he's taken the reins on a big Hollywood production before. He's also just come off a big, critical success with Jojo Rabbit, which I loved that movie. I thought it was great. There was some, mixed things. I don't know. It's always the case with any big movie like that. But, yeah, I thought it was great. And it won him an important award that's therefore pushed his career even further. So he's really been going up and up and up and up, which makes him quite a attractive prospect for a brand like Star Wars, which, and it's definitely a brand at this point rather than anything else. But because the thing with them is, for decades, George Lucas just protected his baby, and everything that came out was heaps of commercialized stuff to do with it, but he had a lot of control over all that. And then maybe 8 years ago or something like that, he sold it and basically went off into the wilderness to retire. And he sold Lucasfilms to Disney. And so Disney owns the Star Wars brand now, and they've done that, that's why you've seen this rash of new Star Wars movies and stuff like that since then, because Lucas has taken his taken his hands off the reins or whatever. So that led to this prequel trilogy, which started off interestingly. I thought the second one was by far the most interesting of them, but then the third one was an absolute wreck. To be fair, it was enjoyable enough in the moment. You could watch the film, it had all the right beats, sweet as, action-packed, really, fast-paced, the closure in the areas where you wanted closure, I suppose, but at the same time, as soon as you step out of the theater, you've forgotten it. It was completely non-memorable. When you start actually trying to think about it, you realize how many plot holes there were in it. It just didn't make sense. So, and the biggest, that's fine. I think the studio could handle it if it sold heaps and people didn't like it necessarily. But which is what happened with the second one, probably, in that trilogy. But the fact that it was so forgettable, man, it just came and went like that and just got buried. And I think that's probably put them in a bit of a weird situation because the big trilogy was the obvious thing to do. The best of the new movies they've made was that spin-off one, the Rogue One spin-off one, but that's not a repeatable thing. So I guess they've just got it, because they tried to do another spin-off type thing with the Han Solo movie and it was apparently terrible. I never watched that one. So they're probably in a position where they need someone like Taika Waititi, who was cool, who was fresh, who was gonna give it a certain style to a film like that, which just makes him a big old deal for them. So it makes sense from all parts. I think you can see why this is a thing that just seems like probably quite a natural combination. And Waititi, you could also say, had a bit of a audition period with that Mandalorian TV show as well. He voiced a droid in one of the episodes, and then he directed the last one, which in hindsight now feels like that was probably like a direct audition for bigger Star Wars things, because they have been sneaky with it. I think Ryan Johnson did the second of the trilogies, and the trilogy, the latest one, and then I think he was meant to do the last one as well, but they took him away from him because he probably put his own fingerprints on it a little bit too much. And there's been other things about I think the Han Solo movie had some weirdness with the director, people coming and go. They don't seem to want too much of the auteur thing coming through. They don't really want directors putting their own spin on it. They've got to be making a Star Wars movie first and foremost. But they've gone to Taika Waititi, who is a guy who is he has proven that he can do that. Has proven he can walk that line between making something distinctively his own, but also still a part of a wider franchise and a much bigger franchise. And then also, I think maybe just the timing for Star Wars, that they've had a couple flops recently. If they want to do something, they might have to take a bit more of a risk, and he is a guy who hasn't really failed on anything yet. So it's cool from them. I'm certainly excited to see what he does with it. I also excited for him to do this, make a massive success of himself, even more than he already has, and then go back to making films that he wants to make. But we'll see how that goes. I think the fact that he's not, he's sort of said he's not a massive fanboy Star Wars type, so that probably helps things. He won't treat it with the kind of what's that word I'm looking for here? The kind of awe. He won't see it as sacred in a way where you can't mess with things a little bit in order to make something more interesting. So, he's a good fit for sure, and it's pretty bloody amazing to see a Kiwi director doing something like that. I mean, he's not the first. Peter Jackson did the Lord of the Rings things, but that's not quite the same, is it? It's not on the same scale as working for this franchise like that. So, yeah, man, wait and see what happens, but it should be good.
Is this the same Star Wars stuff that Benioff and Weiss, who were in charge of the Game of Thrones TV series, they were meant to do some Star Wars stuff, but then they walked away from...
Yeah, I think you're right.
So Taika Waititi could be viewed as the replacement for Benioff and Weiss, which adds to craziness because he's taken over from some Game of Thrones dudes who some people think fucked up Game of Thrones. So, power to Taika.
Yeah, like I said, there's been a lot of sort of weirdness with who they've entrusted to take this thing forward, and certainly as far as Disney are concerned, I think they'd be happy to produce a Star Wars movie at least once every 2 years for now until eternity. That they'll just keep churning it out and raking in the big dollars. but it has to be of a certain quality in order to get somewhere. So I think coming after that trilogy is probably exactly when you want to be like someone like Taika Waititi getting involved, because he's going to have a little more freedom than he otherwise would. He's not going to have to work quite as much within the boundaries because they need to expand the thing right now. Like, they need to show that they can make this a sustainable, ongoing, just like production line, which doesn't sound like a very exciting prospect, but this is probably the time you'd want to be making that. But I think they've got others, like they'll have other movies in like semi-production as well, like just ideas or scripts that they've asked for, and then maybe they won't get made, or maybe they will. Like, they'll have a whole lot of irons in the fire. He's not like, they're not coming in and saying, you, Māori dude from New Zealand, we need you to like take absolutely everything of this Star Wars thing. You're in charge of the entirety of the future direction of all this. Nah, they're like, he'll be one roll of the dice of many for them, but it's what you do with it. So hey, I mean, I struggle to get excited over like big old production, like massive Hollywood production type films though. They're just very I don't know, they're formulaic, repeat that word again, but that's what it is.
Beauty. There's been no shortage of the creative Kiwi exports doing their thing as well. I recently found out that Cliff Curtis, the actor from Rotorua, I think he's been in some Star Wars stuff and various big-time Hollywood movies, he played Pablo Escobar in a film called Blow, which I think was about Boston George who dealt with Escobar importing cocaine into USA, and Cliff Curtis, a Māori dude from Rota Vegas, plays Pablo Escobar and speaks a bit of Spanish. So I was interested to see that. And then also on the tally, we've had a lot of Flight of the Conchords. There's been What We Do in the Shadows, further deepening the Kiwi creative excellence that has an impact and influence on the world.
Yeah, I saw Cliff Curtis not that long ago in Doctor Sleep, which was directed by Mike Flanagan, who's a bit of a like horror movie. I was not going to say up and comer because I think he's pretty well established at this point. He's like one of the better dudes out there making horror things, and he's done a couple Stephen King adaptations, and this was one of them. And Cliff Curtis played a black guy in it, and then he was playing a Spanish guy in that one. And then you go through his IMDb and stuff, he's played like Arabs. He's played, hey, if you want to go all the way back to the Once Were Warriors, got to play someone of his own nationality in that one. But ever since then, like, he just seems to be one of those like generic ethnic guy for hires. Which, I mean, hey, keep getting them checks, eh? Like, do what you got to do. It's Hollywood, so no one gets to like play by the rules exactly and that kind of thing. But shout out to Cliff Curtis, always working the hustle. I watched just last night. I watched a new film that's just come out called The True History of the Kelly Gang, which is, oh man, that movie was like I don't know how to describe it. It was like a heavily stylized version of the Ned Kelly story, based on a Peter Carey novel, I think it was. So, it's called The True History of the Kelly Gang, but it's not about the true history. And a lot of the themes of the movie is playing on like how we make our own history and that kind of things, and how we tell our stories, who we tell them to, how we choose to tell, and that kind of thing. So, and it was just this like sort of real stylized punk rock, extremely Australian version. Like, it's one of the most Australian movies I've ever watched, in a way which is hard to describe. But if you saw it, you'd know exactly what I mean. But he like 45 minutes into the movie, up pops Marlon Williams playing a guy from California doing an American accent, which his accent work wasn't fantastic, but he did get to sing a song during the thing, and he's a sneaky good actor, that dude, which is unsurprising. And then like 10 minutes after that, Thomasin McKenzie popped up playing like she was playing like a teenage prostitute with a little baby. But Thomas Mackenzie being she was the girl in the closet in Jojo Rabbit, another New Zealand actress as well. And both of them, like, pretty bloody excellent in this movie. Neither of them, she was playing like I think she was doing an Irish accent or something like that. So neither of them actually got to be, two New Zealanders in an Australian movie, neither of them playing Australians or New Zealanders, but good fun. And then the main character in that, the main actor in that is an English dude doing a absolutely spot on Australian accent as well. So that was an enjoyable romp of a film, but yeah, following on that trend, like completely unexpected, two of New Zealand's top creators popping up in that as well.
Booyakasha. I am just going to take a moment to plant a seed here, Wildcard, and not necessarily sure if it's getting feedback, but it is just planting the seed for something that we have talked about. I think it was a few weeks ago where we talked about grassroots sport in New Zealand and the importance of grassroots sport coming out of the pandemic and the importance of rallying around your local club, whatever sport it is, and using that as a focal point, a bastion of your community. So had a little brainwave just to try and play that up, pump that up, and make it a big deal in terms of rallying our fans and listeners and readers and Kiwi sports fans to really make that a priority moving forward. So this is just planting the seed, and we'll keep that at the front of our mind over the next few weeks. And once we emerge from the pandemic shadow and things are starting to happen, we'll put it out there. Well, we're putting it out there now, but we'll put it in bright lights and try and get a bit of a community spirit thing going on with people sharing their photos and videos of how their local club is bouncing back. It's a grassroots bounce back is the general premise, and what people are doing for their local club and how their local club is forming the chrysalis that is going to allow those clubs to emerge as butterflies later on this year, or just be the place where people can go and be part of their community. This has kind of come from a lot of focus on professional sports, and we did talk about this a couple weeks ago, so we won't need to go too deep into this, but there's a lot of focus on professional sports and when they're returning, how they're returning, what they're doing, which overlooks the real importance and value of grassroots sports. But then it's also a case of grassroots sports being talked about super negatively because everyone's stressing about how grassroots sports will come out of this. Everyone's predicting the worst for these local clubs and organizations and their community, where the power is with the people, and the people determine how this bounce back goes about taking place. So we definitely want to play that up, pump that up, and start a bit of a rally to get people really around their grassroots sports and make grassroots sports the priority, the focus moving forward. Like, we write and cover professional sports or even amateur sports here in New Zealand, because that's what people kind of want to read the most about. But we're also from a grassroots sports world, so we want to do something to help that. So if you do have any ideas, if you're listening to this and you like this idea, or if you've got a little example just to generate some buzz, or like maybe your mate's cousin's wife, her sister is doing something already at the local grassroots club and they're already in action, like, send us through a photo, send us through a video, and we'll start to generate a bit of momentum, a bit of buzz around that. It's something that we'll definitely want to push and just, generate that buzz around your grassroots club, because at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. It doesn't matter whether the NRL is playing, it doesn't matter whether the Blackcaps are playing, it doesn't really matter what the professionals are up to, even though we're told that the professional level needs to restart to let the money go down to the grassroots. I guess personally, I kind of disagree with that, because if your local community is laying the foundations for your club at the grassroots level, what happens at the professional level doesn't matter. But we all need to take some time and really establish the community, family spirit around those grassroots clubs and rebuild them or build them from the ground up, and take away that reliance on other people giving out stuff and taking away that reliance on the professional sports world. So big focus on the grassroots sport over the next few months, and we'll try and just keep the buzz and momentum and hype around this idea going. So if you are tuned into this, kia kaha to you, and if you've got any little bits and pieces to help us get the ball rolling, spark that up. Otherwise, we'll let it simmer for the next few weeks and see where it leads us. Any little additional notes there to add to that wildcard?
Oh, I think the most powerful thing you said in that was the bit about just like, you know, pushing back against the negative angles on how people are talking about grassroots sports, because it's all about like, I mean, when you get the community together and everyone's sort of thriving and everyone's getting along and making everyone else better by association, like it is such a positive kind of like chemistry, and it's infectious. Like, it's infectiously exciting. It's I don't want to say contagious, because it's probably the wrong word to use at this current moment of time, but that's like, positivity is contagious in its own way, and like just having that kind of like celebration aspect to it, even if it is on a small scale. I mean, grassroots sports is on a small scale, so there's no dramas there. Like, it makes a difference. And when people just hear about how grassroots sports is in trouble all the time, and how like what a struggle it is, like when that's the majority of what you're hearing, you start to believe it pretty quickly. And when you believe it, it influences the way you act, and maybe you feel like, oh, there's not much point going down to the club on a Saturday because nothing's going on. Membership's dwindling. No one's got any money. Blah blah blah. Well, like if you actually like push the positivity, then suddenly it becomes a thing you want to do rather than a thing you feel obliged to do, or a thing you feel isn't even worth it. And on a worse scale, like that, in the same way that negativity will then impact your future decisions, positivity is going to impact your future decisions as well, and it's just a much better way to act, right?
For damn sure. So keep your eyes and ears peeled, and yeah, it is an open invitation. If you do have a photo or a video or anything just to help us generate that momentum and buzz in the early stages, send it through email or social media. You know all our social media channels. The email is the niche cache, all same spelling as the website and the URL, just no spaces, no dashes, no slashes, no dots, just thenichecache@gmail.com. Send any grassroots sports stuff through, otherwise through our social media as well. The kind of main professional sport that is looking to get underway fairly soon is the New Zealand Warriors. They left to Australia, I think, a couple days ago, going to be based in Tamworth. I don't really know or care about the COVID elements of the NRL restarting and the logistics. I just deal in what's happening and think about the Warriors getting back on the footy field. So we're going to get my insight on what the Warriors are up to restarting the NRL. So I'll flip it over to you, Wildcard. We have both been kind of tuned out from the Warriors as much as possible, kind of because we both like to tune out from the NRL. So what do you want to know, Wildcard? How are you feeling about the Warriors? What are your questions and queries? And just any starting points or topic points with regards to New Zealand Warriors restarting their NRL campaign in 2020.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't really felt anything about the Warriors for a little while. I haven't just really thought about them at all. I mean, I don't know if I should ask you first about the logistics of what's going on. I don't know. Like, I assume they're all just going to play in, it's the end of the month, isn't it, when they want to restart it. So the Warriors have got to do their, 2-week quarantine first. I assume they're just going to play all the games in New South Wales. I don't know. I'm not actually sure that they've announced exact, firm plans for all that yet. I don't know. Last I heard, they were talking about doing State of Origin at the end of the year, and it's all a bit weird because you've had this whole broadcasting thing going on as well, not even behind the scenes, it was out in front of the scenes, which it really shouldn't have been, that whole rivalry and whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I suppose the place to start, because we don't need to be the ones saying whether they should be doing this or not. They're in a position where the decision's been made for them. Basically, either you want to be a part of this competition and do what you can, or you don't want to be a part of this competition and therefore risking the very future of the club. It's not really an option they had. And both New Zealand and Australia are in certainly compared to the rest of the world, pretty good spaces as far as the pandemic goes. Both countries seem to be getting on top of it. New Zealand's rounding out towards the end of our sort of lockdown-y stuff at the moment, so that's all sweet as. So we're not going to get crowds at any of these games, but where do we start with this? I have some. I do want to ask you a little bit more about the wider scope of how this has all been perceived, what the Warriors are doing, and how Cameron George has taken it upon himself to be Jesus on the mountain throughout this. But suppose the place to start is just. Not so much the logistics side of it, but just the general vibe of the Warriors and the NRL restarting at a time when, first of all, they get to be sort of leaders on the matter, but because most other sports leagues aren't certainly thinking about, some of them are getting back into training, but no one's really thinking about set dates of getting back to starting this soon. But just the general feeling of what the NRL is going to look like and how that competition's going to go and how the Warriors can be expected to perform within those things. So we'll come back to the other idea I had later on, but pick up the threads of whatever scraps I might have. I'm mixing metaphors there, aren't I? Pick up the scraps of whatever crumbs I might have thrown out there. There must be something.
Well, it's like a double layer situation, because on the first layer, you've got the good vibes that have been directed to the Warriors. So, it's everyone's kind of, the general consensus was that for the NRL continue, the Warriors need to be there. And so for the Warriors, going back to the start of the pandemic, so for the Warriors to, make certain sacrifices and to commit to the NRL in 2020 was perceived as being a great gesture from the Warriors. Shout out to the Warriors. We love the Warriors and so on. But which is cool. The NRL would have definitely been fine without the Warriors. There's no dramas there, because the second layer to this is that the Warriors were absolutely disgusting in their 2 games of the season, and that's been a constant narrative throughout all my Warriors coverage. This year was just how bad they were in those first 2 games, and that leaves us in this position where the Warriors are coming back. And to go back to the idea I put out in one of the email things, was this kind of fork in the road juncture where post-pandemic NRL could be really good for the Warriors. They could completely change their situation, or it'll be a continuation of their rather woeful start to the season. And it's, when you look around the social media and Reddit and just different NRL places, hearing different people, whether it's NRL people or just fans, whatever, there's some people, it's they didn't know what happened in those first 2 games, so they're just focused on the Warriors being the good guys. They're here to save the NRL. They're doing their bit. They're going above and beyond, and everyone should be celebrating the Warriors. And then there's other people who were more tuned in, and it's well, okay, so the Warriors sucked, and they're kind of bigging up their role in all of this, which is just a weird dynamic. And now they come back into the competition. I like, as far as like what to expect from the Warriors, I don't know. That's why it's such an interesting juncture, because it could genuinely go two ways. You would hope that there's like a backs against the wall mentality that brings the best out of the Warriors, but there was also so many bad signs, and it was such a continuation of just the bad footy and just bad footy in those first two games to counter that point. The weirdest thing has been like assessing Cameron George's role as the leader of the Warriors. It's funny because we've got this Michael Jordan Last Dance documentary obviously doing the rounds at the moment, and it's you wonder about the Jerry Krause, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen dynamic. So like Cameron George has been the leader throughout this whole situation, but then you've got leaders like Roger Tuivasa-Sheck and those sorts of characters, and I don't know why I draw that comparison, but not because Cameron George is like a Jerry Krause niggler against the players, but it's just you've got two like levels of leadership operating here with the Warriors in terms of the Cameron George level, and then the Roger Tuivasa-Sheck player value space. But there's been a lot of noise from Cameron George, and Cameron George has done a lot of big talking. And if we go back to the end of last year, when the Warriors did some fantastic summer content that they released on their website and their YouTube page, like the behind the scenes kind of content, I think they were one of three or maybe one of four teams that really invested in summer content and behind the scenes training content, which was great to see. The Penrith Panthers are a great team at that as well, and the Newcastle Knights did some great stuff over the summer. Part of that for the Warriors was the speech Cameron George had in the meeting room, said fuck a few times and talked about how everyone outside the Warriors thinks the Warriors are a laughingstock, and this was the time to prove them all wrong. That's how the off-season started for the Warriors. It was Cameron George. It was picked up by all the media, and it was a bit of a like, from my perspective, the mainstream media just were pretty retarded about it, and they heard Cameron George swearing, and that's how they report about it. I just observed it, took it in. Okay, cool. What's going to happen? Like, where do your actions and what is the manifestation of that talk, and what is the physical manifestation of those beliefs? So that's how the off-season started, and Cameron George's volume was never turned down throughout the summer, and then throughout the pandemic, it's always been pretty damn loud. And we're at this point now where, based on those two games, the stuff Cameron George said throughout the off-season has in no way, shape, or form come to be. And like, but considering how loud and forceful and aggressive he was in those remarks over the off-season about the club and the perception of the Warriors, things are very weird, because those two games to start this season were so bad that it was like, what's happening here? Like, there's a severe disconnect between where the Warriors, like what they think they are and where they're heading, which I can see. Like, I can see, I'm a Warriors sympathizer to some extent. Like, I can see the moves they made. They're, throughout Stephen Kearney's tenure, they've been on this kind of rebuilding process and trying to remake the club and push the club forward in a certain direction. But none of that is being played out on the actual footy field, which is a dynamic that has been present. Like, obviously the Warriors have been kind of shit for a number of years now, even since the arrival of Stephen Kearney, since the arrival of Cameron George. Like, this isn't exactly anything new in that specific George Kearney era. But the more recent activities going back to the start of the summer, when there was such a focus from Cameron George on closing not the COVID bubble, but the team bubble around November last year, and coming closer together to really shut out the outside noise and all that stuff, none of that came to pass in the first two rounds of the 2020 season. So when I think about it, the last 6 months have been very interesting for the Warriors in terms of how, in like thinking about their how the other people perceive the club, thinking about how the Warriors perceive themselves as an organization, as a team, and then coming into this situation where they are the most impacted of all the NRL teams. They have to change the most about their lives and about their professional systems and their operations. The Warriors have had the biggest impact during this pandemic time, and now they're essentially starting the journey of getting back into NRL footy, and it's an absolute. The NRL has been a bit of a shambles, but my thoughts about the Warriors are an absolute shambles as well, because when there is such a disconnect between what is said and what is manifested, you lose complete trust. There's some sports teams who talk it up and talk a certain set of morals and values and how they operate. Like, take Craig Bellamy, for example. He laid out the law of the Melbourne Storm with regards to social media, and he basically said, like, I don't think it was necessarily a spray as it was portrayed, but he laid out to the Storm players, you're not going to bring the Melbourne Storm down through your use of social media. That's how it is. This club is bigger than you, and don't be fucking stupid with what you're doing. Now, when the Melbourne Storm do that and they talk in that manner, you know and trust it, because anytime the Melbourne Storm talks about doing something or talks it up or just whatever, there is actions to back up what they have talked about. There is a reality rooted in action and physical stuff that is connected to what they've said. The Warriors don't have that trust. So they don't have that trust because they've talked it up to various levels over the course of their existence, but more specifically the past 6 months, they've talked a lot of stuff up, but there's been no correlation between their talk and their footy and how they go about their business as a club. So I guess coming into their restart and thinking about where the Warriors sit, they are in a very strange position, I think, wildcard, where the club doesn't have any trust with people like myself, fans, observers, because there's a disconnect between what they say and what they do. It's a club that is on an interesting timeline. Like, there's not... I could be sympathetic to Stephen Kearney at the Warriors 2 years ago, because I could see that this was a kind of a long process. There were a lot of stuff that needed to change. You've got to revamp the roster, and you've got to make moves over a period of time, and you've got to build chemistry, you've got to build combinations. All that stuff takes time. And you've got to rejig the development pathways with the SG ball and scrapping the jersey flag. And all that stuff is hard work that takes time. So I've historically been quite sympathetic to Kearney and George and the club, the direction they're heading. But we're at a point now where it's like, if there continues to be such a disconnect, now we're approaching the end of that cycle. So we're coming to a point where Stephen Kearney's job just looks more and more sketchy if there aren't the performances. And at some stage, like, how much more bullshit talk can be handled? Like, how many more times can people in Aotearoa, fans and casual sports people, how much more can they listen to the club and then see a completely different way of like how that talk is manifested? And all of that is coming into this moment of the NRL restart. And I think the Warriors, they're not a super interesting club around the NRL because, you know, most of the Australians don't really care. They don't know what's going on at the Warriors and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, this is a fascinating time for the Warriors because, as I've talked about this in quite a long monologue rant here, I think this could be one of the defining moments of the club, is how 2020 ends up is going to shape the next 5 years of the Warriors, because if things continue to be as bad as they were, some stuff will have to change drastically. Otherwise, you know, it can be that rallying point, and there could be just a few slices of luck and more good vibes around the club from externally, could then flow internally through the club. I don't know, but it does feel like a very interesting time for the Warriors as an organization, as a club, over the course of their lifetime. Like, I don't know if there's been such an interesting, specific point in time with regards to the Warriors as what we're dealing with now.
I'm inclined to agree with that too. I mean, it's I think this is why we've seen Cameron George kind of take it upon himself, like put all the stuff on his shoulders and be the guy. Whenever someone's got to talk to the media, he'll do it. He'll handle all this. He'll be the face of everything. And I mean, part of that is because as a like club dude on a more executive level, it is that these are actually his decisions to make. Like, he is, like, Stephen Kearney doesn't get to pick where the hotel or book a chartered flight or you know, all those kind of things. So part of it is that they're just going to the direct guy who is in charge, but also I think he's very clearly, and I think he's even admitted this a couple times, like, he is trying to shield his players from having to deal with any of this, and he's put it more in a light of, like, let them just be with their families and enjoy this time, because we're going into this unknown thing. We don't know exactly how long we'll be over there, or how long it'll be until they get, like, how long until they're able to bring their families over later on when things, like, when restrictions ease up a bit more. It's all a very unknown time, so he's just like, let's take all the pressure off the players and do that. But also, like, it'd be naive to think that the players aren't helped, like, that he's not thinking about the fact that the players went out there, played 2 absolutely abysmal games, and had the league continued on the way it was going, would have been staring down a wooden spoon the way they were going. I'm sure they'll be better later on. I mean, to be honest, I don't even think those first 2 rounds should count. I think they should wipe the points from those. Like, there was just so much confusion about it as it was going, and like then the crowds disappeared and the Warriors were stuck over there, and they did, like, it's just, the whole thing was such a mess really from the NRL's point of view, that I think when they pick up the league again, they should be starting from scratch. But I also say that as a Dragons fan whose team is also 0-2, but so maybe I'm being a little bit biased about the matter. But I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know, they'd be a bit rough on the teams that actually performed well. So I mean, they're not going to do that, and maybe there's an argument that they shouldn't, but I kind of feel like they should. But anyway, I think Cameron George knows exactly what he's doing in terms of shielding his players, and it's not just about the off-field stuff. And also, like, I can't remember the last time I heard from Stephen Kearney. I'm sure, like I said, I've been checked out, so I'm sure he's done more than I've am giving him credit for now, but like, he's not exactly, and all the reasons you just described, he's not exactly in the best position himself as a coach, because he has had this team for multiple years, and he started off by rebuilding things quite significantly. And I mean, while I was working yesterday, I had The Godfather on in the background, because I'm reading this book called Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, which is a fairly famous book about like the 1970s film industry, and how you got this weird time where suddenly the studio systems were falling apart, and that meant that you got these like very hands-on directors coming through and making films that they wanted to make. So you got all these gritty kind of like dark, morally ambiguous movies being made around that time. So I was riding with, I had The Godfather on in the background because I just read the chapter about that, and I didn't need to watch it like full on. I've seen it too many times, but I thought I'd have it on in the background just for atmosphere. And there's one of the things they keep saying to Tom Hagen in that about how he's not a wartime consigliere, and that's why they sort of relegate him to just lawyer status for a while there. And I suspect, I was thinking about Stephen Kearney just now with that in my head, and like maybe he is a wartime consigliere where like when he came in and the club was in a bit of a crisis, he's the perfect guy to come in and be like, gonna start cracking some whips, gonna start getting these guys into discipline. But when they actually had to turn the corner and go from that into starting to perform, they had that one season where they made the top 8 and then I think lost to Penrith in the first round or something. And Tuvasashek got injured and didn't quite work out. But that should have been the jumping off point for something better. And then last year they were mostly average, and the first 2 games of this season were absolutely disastrous. So he's at a time where he should be speeding on into the future, doesn't really seem to be doing that. They maybe need to find themselves a Michael Corleone to help him. I don't think it's a matter of getting rid of Kearney so much as it is like bringing in people around him who can also add more of a tactical nuance. I don't know. These are questions beyond my pay grade. But like, Cameron George has obviously had all these things on his brain, I have to think, during this whole process. And I think he's quite consciously shielded them, but he can only shield them for so long, because once the games start up again, suddenly it's all about that. I think this whole period has bought the Warriors more time, and certainly helped them in terms of like just general sympathy for the cause and that kind of thing. And it has given them a little bit of an excuse. I don't know if you can use that as a thing, because they've got a lot of like, it's basically full player buy-in. Everyone's going over there except 1 or 2 situations which were known about and not at all controversial, despite some of the headlines to the contrary. But yeah, you either use that and galvanize and go on to something and find a way to perform above and beyond yourself. Hopefully, if the case really is that the Warriors were a bit too distracted in those first 2 games, then there's room to improve from there naturally as well. But also haven't seen most of those 2 games. I didn't really see, like, I just don't know that they've got the players to be a competitive team in the 2020 NRL season, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Yeah, I think they have bought themselves some time just by coincidence because of all this, but I mean, it all comes back to the last thing I was going to throw at you, because we sort of talked about Cameron George a lot there, so that was one of the things. The other thing is the way that this has all been perceived from the rest of the NRL, and you did mention it a little bit, like it's almost like, you know, the way people on Anzac Day will talk about the great sacrifices of the past generation so that we can grow up in a free country and these kind of things. It's because the sort of things that I've, like, to be honest, as an adult, have questioned a little bit more. Not the sacrifices, but just the idea that it was either freedom or bust kind of, I don't know. Again, like, that's probably not a conversation for this. It's always a healthy thing to acknowledge the sacrifices in all aspects, not just war, because war is despicable regardless, and the fact is that neither of those world wars last century should have happened, but people knew how to talk to each other. That wouldn't have been the case. But like, sacrifices just in general, the sacrifices of like parents to create better opportunities for children, simple things like that. Like, there's always something to celebrate. The way the Warriors are being talked about at the moment, like the sacrifices they've made in order to keep the NRL going, it just feels, I don't know, almost a little, not phony, because I believe that it's genuine when people say that, but just like they're doing a lot of those podcasty type things on Fox Sports with the NRL coverage at the moment, probably because that's all they've got to do. But every time, like, the Warriors, they're doing so great. Like, what they're doing for the league is just incredible, and we got to really take a second to acknowledge. Like, I'm sort of on the same boat as what you said before. Like, the NRL could have gone on without the Warriors. This is more like the Warriors have to be in there for the Warriors' sake. It's not to protect the NRL; it's to protect their place in the NRL. Because if they step out, they might not get back in. You know, so I just don't. it's not that it's not genuine, that kind of thing. It's just that it seems a little too one-notey for me. I don't know, it just leaves a weird taste the way that the Australian media in particular is just highlighting the sacrifices and the, just the, like, almost like a bit of a hero worshipping thing for what the Warriors are doing, and I just don't see, I don't know, it's just a weird, I don't know if it's a disconnect, but it's just a weird situation in general. The way that's been perceived versus all the other aspects of what the Warriors' situation is that we've just been talking about for a while.
It is a very strange and interesting point you raised there. I'd say it's far more tricky and niggly for the NRL to continue with the Warriors. Like, it's far more trouble for the NRL to continue with their Warriors being part of the whole competition. Like, it would have been far easier for the NRL just to say to the Warriors, look, we're just going to rock on. Like, I think there's stuff around Super Rugby of the New Zealand teams just competing in a competition, and no one in New Zealand would be mad. We don't look favourably upon Australia because they're weirdos, but with common sense, you can't look at the NRL and be like, oh, fuck you guys for continuing without the Warriors. Like, in this scenario, it just would have been easier for the NRL to continue without the Warriors. They could have had the same competition, and it's not like the idea of the Warriors saving the NRL is just not true, because the NRL can continue fine without the Warriors. Sure, there might be some broadcasting matters, but like, even then, as someone who covers the NRL from a Kiwi NRL perspective, there's more than enough Kiwi NRL players in the Australian teams to still have like an audience from New Zealand, let alone all the Kiwis who, old mate Dave who supports the Bulldogs, and Hemi, who's always been a Roosters fan or whatever. There's those people around New Zealand who only support an Australian club.
Even a lot of Warriors fans have a second team as well, like whether it's because they're old enough to have been supporting the NRL before the Warriors existed, or just like, have a soft spot for Benji Marshall. Therefore, it's like, I'm a Warriors fan, but I like the Tigers too a little bit,
Yeah, exactly. So there's that market that's still there, but straight up and down, no playing around, no bullshit. The NRL could have continued without the Warriors, and as you said, it's far more necessary for the Warriors to be looking to continue playing, and they're more at the mercy of the NRL and the pandemic than the NRL being at the mercy of the Warriors. And that's
so what
cool.
do you think is the reason then for the Warriors kind of like idolatry, Like, because we're both in agreement that the NRL could go on all right, but there just seems to be this, I mean, maybe it's just as simple as the NRL community patting itself on the back and saying, look how great we are because we've facilitated things to let the Warriors in, or I don't know if there's more to it than that, I don't know.
The most simplest thing would be that they feel sorry for the Warriors. I think that's a very realistic idea and narrative.
Yeah.
I
wonder if the Warriors were 2-0 with like a plus 80 points difference and having won the premiership two of the last 3 years. Say that hypothetical alternate reality. Do you think the reaction would be the same? Because I suspect it might not be.
I think it would be the same. It would just be same, but different in the sense that the NRL would need the Warriors.
Yeah,
if the Warriors were a consistent top 4 team, and if the Warriors are a consistent top 4 team, that completely changes the rugby league market in Aotearoa. And so not only do you have the fact that one of the best teams in the NRL needs to be there, but you've also got the market that needs to be there to further support the NRL. So if the Warriors had been really good and been a consistently good NRL team, then the NRL would need the Warriors, as opposed to everyone feeling sorry for the Warriors with what they have to go through. And I wonder how those first 2 performances fit into the idea of people feeling sorry for the Warriors. Like, I don't know this. This is what I'm trying to figure out. Would you be... Because if you just saw those first 2 games from the Warriors, you may be like, fuck the Warriors. They've been shit. We don't need them. Whatever. Or those watching those first two games will make you feel even more sorry for the Warriors that they have to go through this, and they've also been shit in those two games. So you can either think that the Warriors don't need to bust their ass to stay in the NRL based on those two games, or you can go further down the feeling sorry for the Warriors idea. What I think about the most, though, is, and I said this at the start, when does it stop being worthwhile? Like, all we hear from the Warriors and this whole idea about feeling sorry for the Warriors is because they have to leave their families, they have to live in Australia, which isn't like, when you sign up to play for the Warriors, you're not signing up to live and be based in Australia. You're signing up to be a part of a New Zealand-based NRL franchise or team. That's not part of your gig. That's not part of what you're dealing with here. You sign up with the Warriors knowing that you're going to have to travel to Australia every second week. That's the whole shtick here. So for the Warriors to be based in Australia, that's tough. It's difficult. And literally all the sympathy and feeling sorry for the Warriors is based around those ideas. And remember, the family and the community spirit and the culture of the Warriors is very similar to the culture of New Zealand. For whatever reason, there's just a greater emphasis on family and being around people and the atmosphere of the club. It's a very Kiwi thing, and what the Warriors are going through now is the opposite of that to some extent. So all of that, with all of that in mind, and we're hearing it direct from the wives of the players themselves, of the officials. We're hearing about the sacrifices that are being made for the Warriors to keep playing in the NRL. What happens if the Warriors lose their first three games of the restart? What happens if the Warriors get through July and then the start of August and they've won 2 games? And they've lost the majority of their games. At what stage? Because that's a very realistic possibility. Like, I'm only throwing this up there because from what I saw in those first 2 games, people need to acquaint themselves with this thought. Because the Warriors were so bad in those first 2 games that it is very realistic that the Warriors continue to be bad, and at what stage is it worthwhile? At what stage do the players themselves start to switch off? Because if you're one of these players and you're like, fuck, just left my kids, left my missus, I'm over here stuck in basically quarantine isolation, like the boys are all good, the team's all good, we love each other, but we're kind of, we've spent a lot of time together, it's getting a bit niggly, a bit frisky, and we're not winning games, and we're also playing really shit, and now I'm starting to question everything, and I want to go home, and I want to see my kids because we're losing games, and it's just the same shit. Like, when does all that happen, and what's the reaction around it? Because I can't sit here now and be like, if I'm a player, if this happens, I don't think anyone can really be like, oh, but you signed up for this, like, no, it's a whole different kettle of fish if the Warriors do reach that point where they just keep losing games, and then it's like, well, what are we doing here? What's the point? We're not going to be a factor in the NRL this season. We're not even going to be close to the top 8. We can't win anything, and we're sacrificing all this for what? Like, just so I can still get paid? Just so the people can feel good about the Warriors? Like, I think there's a very possible outcome here that is very tricky, very niggly, because I don't know how the public will react if the Warriors are losing games and a certain, like, think about how mentally strong you would have to be if you lose 5 out of 7 games post-pandemic and you're based in Australia away from all your families, and those thoughts of like, is this worthwhile? What are we doing here? What's the point? I want to see my family. All those thoughts are going to be going through your head. So are you mentally strong enough to be like, nah, fuck it. this game's going to be the game. We're going to win the game. Yeah. Like, it's a crazy little situation to ponder.
Yeah, and I don't think any of this, like, I don't think the NRL would be thinking of restarting this soon, like, in the matter of, 3 weeks or something like that, if they didn't. I mean, you obviously can't have any assurances about this, so it's a gamble. Like, it's a definite gamble. Shout out to Michael Jordan, because it's a gamble. But they would be working under the assumption, at least, that things will be opening up more so, like, down the line, and they will hopefully, like, not have to be without their wives and kids for the entirety of the rest of the year. Like, they will be banking on, I don't know, say, in a, like, maybe, I don't know, 2 months' time or something like that. Their family will hopefully be able to join them, and maybe, I mean, it's so tricky with logistics, because, like, if it gets to that point where New Zealand and Australia feel like they're in the clear, will teams get to play home games again, or is that a fair thing you can say, because of the way that, like, you can't change the rules of the competition midway through? So I don't know how that is supposed to work. There's so many, like, moving parts to this, and that's why, I mean, we don't even know what the NRL are thinking of, like, what the draw is going to look like, or all these things. We're weeks away from games and don't even know, like, how that's going to look. So, and then how that would look down the line. At what point will they be able to take crowds back? If they can take crowds, is it, I don't know, it seems like such a, I mean, let's be honest, it's a huge compromise to do this whole thing at all. So, regardless of what happens, there's probably going to be an asterisk over this season, say, like, oh yeah, that was the pandemic season, that was 2020, we all know what happened in 2020. That wasn't maybe necessarily a legit NRL season was realistic possibility. We're looking back on it in those, like, from that lens as well down the line. So, I mean, the Warriors are easily the most, in the most, like, volatile situation, because, yeah, like, a couple more losses and you're already probably going to be dealing with a shortened season, so they might feel like they're out of contention within a month of restarting the league. And if that's the case, then how are you possibly going to keep motivated? But they could also go on a nice run of wins with everyone else feeling as well like this is just a weird situation. I don't know what's going on here. I remember when I was a kid, like, when I was like 11 or something like that, probably, we played football against a team that forgot their jerseys. And so already, like, it's a weird, playing, like, youth football, or the youth sport in general, is always a bit of a weird thing, because you're not quite old enough to have that full buy-in of the competition. Like, there's a little bit of an illusion that everyone needs to share, that this thing is serious and important for it to matter. When you're a kid, you're just out there running around and kicking a ball, and there's no tactics, and no one's too worried about that kind of thing. And I just remember there was, like, we were playing a team we were supposed to beat, but they didn't have their jerseys, so they were just wearing, like, normal shirts and whatever with bibs, and it felt like a practice game because of that. And because of that, I just remember our team playing terrible, and I remember saying to the coach, who was probably my dad at that point, actually, would have been coaching that team, being like, this is just weird, like, it doesn't feel like a real game. I don't know why that memory, well, I know why that memory just flashed back to me then, but that's what it's sort of, like, that could easily feel the case, especially for other teams who aren't making the same sacrifice as the Warriors. They might not also have the same motivation as the Warriors. Like, that could work in the other way, not just that the Warriors can channel it, but also that other teams will feel, especially the way they're talking about the Warriors, they might even feel like they owe the Warriors a little bit, and they're just going 99.9% as hard as they would otherwise, and letting the Warriors back into games because of that. Like, that's also a possibility that could happen. There's just so much about this potential NRL season. And the other thing that could happen is there could be a flare-up in corona cases between now and then, and they might not get to do it at all. Like, that's unlikely at this point with the current trajectory, but it's not impossible. Like, there's just moving parts all over the place.
Moving parts all over the place, and especially in my thoughts about the Warriors. It's just, it's a bit all over the show, but very,
before
very,
all this.
Yeah, very interesting to see how it plays out. And I was about to say, like, wait and see, like, on the noise coming out of their training camp in Tamworth that they'll be going through at the moment, because of, as I explained, the noise out of the Warriors and what happens from the Warriors are completely not related. So not going to be paying any attention to news out of the Warriors camp during this period. Just got to wait and see how they go in the first few rounds of NRL footy. I do want to finish with some actual tangible things on like how the Warriors. I have thought about like how the Warriors can be better, and some very simple things are from their first few games. There wasn't a lot of dummy half running, so getting dummy half scooting out of the ruck. The fact that Eliasa Katoa was the best player of those two games and was the only player like making meters, being a brutal runner of the footy. You've got guys like David Fusatua looked like he was in concrete those two games. Like he looked slow, he looked sluggish, he looked lethargic. The whole team looked pretty slow and out of energy. So if the team, that's the key thought I had from those first few games was the intensity, energy, and attitude that is required to win NRL games was not there in those first two games. So how do you manufacture that after what the Warriors have been through? Like, how do you come out having gone through it? Like, I think for everyone, this period could be described as absorbing. Like, it's just so absorbing having to go through every day doing the same shit and thinking the same thoughts and exposed to the same sort of messaging and stuff like that, let alone if you're a Warriors player who's trying to prepare for the NRL to come back and you've got a bit of mental baggage from those first few games. How are you going to roll out with the required fizz that was quite clearly absent from those first few games? I don't know, but let alone the fact that the veteran players weren't very good either. Guys like Blake Green, Adam Blair were pretty mediocre in those first few games, and they're the leaders of the club. They're the guys who are leading, along with Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, like the atmosphere of the team throughout this period. So, I'll tell you what, Wildcard, going to be pretty happy not to think or talk about the Warriors over the next few episodes. I've kind of emptied my tank there about the Warriors in that episode, and we'll wait and see for how they come back into NRL footy later on this month.
Yeah, and then when they do, they'll be the only thing we can talk about in the podcast for a while. So, I'll say this, like, we're probably at the point, like, knock on wood, fingers crossed, all of those things, but hopefully we're at the point where we can, like, we're not going to get another big flare-up or anything like this, either in New Zealand or Australia, which means that this will all go ahead, but more importantly, like, it'll mean that when it does go ahead, as compromised as it will be, it will hopefully be safe enough to be reasonable. Like, we won't have to be talking about, like, how, sort of like what we were at the start of those first two rounds, talking about just what like, not just what a mess it was to keep on going at that time, but how, like, borderline inhumane it was to be trying to continue the competition at that point. Like, hopefully all that stuff's in the rear window. We don't have to worry about that. Which means that, I don't know, it's going to be a bit of a relief to have some live sport back. I got to be honest. Like, if it's going to be all health and safety checked, then, like, don't have to worry about that moral side of it. Then yeah, man, like, it's just been a weird one having absolutely no sport to, because the thing I didn't like at first is just like, yeah, sweet as I can do without sport, and the first like week is just like, cool, I don't have to like feel like I have a deadline to write this amount of stuff about this many things, like, and even before that it was starting to wind down, and so it was kind of a little bit of a relief to get away from it at first. And what I didn't expect necessarily was just how much, like, my kind of day-to-day is shaped by what sport was on. So, like, weekends didn't feel like weekends, for example, because there wasn't, NRL games, Super Rugby games, whatever, on in the evening. There weren't Premier League games throughout the night, so I never had days where I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which meant I was sleeping through more, but then it meant I was sleeping in more as well. I settled into like just the sleeping patterns start pushing forward a bit too much in one direction, then I had to go back to setting my alarm nice and firmly. But what did I settle on? I had it at 7:15. I thought I'd be generous to myself and move it forward to 7:45, which is when I've been waking up since. So I've had to go to such measures to shape things that just hasn't been, and let alone the fact that another one is often at nighttime I can chuck on some I might fall asleep with just like my phone on Sky Go or something, watching a NRL game or listening to the ABC commentary. I think it's ABC that does it, the radio commentary for a game now and then. Something like that, like just little aspects like that, which would normally, I don't even think about how much they fit into like just the routine of a day, and also like shaping the days in terms of I already said the thing about the weekend, but like Friday nights are a sport night as well, so I wouldn't be watching a movie then generally if I'm watching a Dragons game or something like that. Now I'm just watching movies every night or TV or whatever. It's just different. Like every day feels sort of similar. I don't know. It's long rambling thing, but it's just a weird one how even obviously it's going to be worse. Well, not worse because it's something we love. It's going to be more integral to us, I suppose, because we've also making our careers around this. So we're writing about these things and following them to a degree. We're talking about them. But even just on a more insidious level than that, just how much of a role sports seems to have. It's been a funky one without it, and it'll be a weird one as it eases back in, because it's not going to all come back at once either. It's going to be a very slow rollout, and how that happens is going to, I don't know, it's going to be strange. It's going to be very strange.
We do have UFC. I think there's a UFC event coming up. Might be this weekend in the USA. So UFC is trying to get back underway, and that might be the start of the process. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up there, and we'll bounce back next week with another episode. And as the sports increase, we'll fire up with 2 episodes once again. So other than that, kia kaha, stay beautiful, and just enjoy the sunshine. You.